Welcome back, everyone. If you've ever stayed somewhere longer than you should have because you believed loyalty would eventually pay off, I want you to share your experience in the comments. And before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss stories like this. My name is Laura Bennett, and for 10 years, I was the one who stayed. I joined the IT company when things were still steady. Not perfect, but stable enough that people felt secure. I learned the systems quickly, took pride in solving problems, and became someone others relied on. I wasn't the loudest person in the room, but I was the one who made sure things kept running when deadlines got tight. In the early years, people talked about growth, promotions, new projects, bigger clients. It felt like we were building something that would last. Then slowly, things began to change. One person left, then another. At first, it didn't seem serious. People move on. That's normal. But the exits didn't stop. Departments started getting smaller. Workloads started getting heavier. The atmosphere shifted, little by little. Still, I stayed. I told myself stability would return. I told myself loyalty mattered. I had no idea that 10 years later, all of it would end in a single morning. At first, the changes were easy to ignore. When the first few people left, there were small goodbye lunches and polite emails wishing them well. Everyone said the same things. Better opportunity, shorter commute, new challenge. It all sounded normal, like part of the natural rhythm of a workplace. But then more people started leaving. The team I joined with slowly thinned out. Desks that used to be filled every day stayed empty for weeks before anyone new appeared. Sometimes they weren't filled at all. The work didn't disappear, though. It just spread across the rest of us. I remember one week when 3 people from the same department resigned within days of each other. The office felt quieter after that. Conversations were shorter. Meetings felt heavier. I stayed late more often, helping cover tasks that no longer had an owner. At first, I didn't mind. It felt good to be needed. It felt like I was proving something by staying steady while everything shifted around me. People started coming to me with questions more frequently. Laura, do you know how this system works? Laura, can you help me with this issue? I always said yes. By the 3rd year, the company felt very different from the place I had first joined. The energy was gone. The big plans people used to talk about were replaced by quieter conversations about budgets, deadlines, and keeping clients satisfied. We weren't growing anymore. We were maintaining. That's when I started taking on work that wasn't technically part of my role. At first, it was small things. Helping another department troubleshoot a system. Stepping in when someone was out sick. Covering responsibilities until a new hire came in. But the new hires didn't always come. Soon, I was handling tasks across multiple teams without really thinking about it. I learned systems I was never trained on. I stayed late to finish projects that no longer had full teams behind them. Slowly, without anyone formally asking, I became the person who knew how everything connected. One afternoon, I overheard someone in a meeting say something that stuck with me. If Laura leaves, we're going to struggle. I wasn't meant to hear it, but I did. And for the first time, I realized just how much I had quietly taken on. Hearing that should have worried me. Instead, it made me feel valued. I didn't think about the pressure behind those words. I focused on what they seemed to mean. That I mattered. That I was important to the way things ran. It gave me a strange kind of motivation, knowing people depended on me to keep things steady. So I leaned in even more. I started staying later without being asked. If something broke, I fixed it. If someone was overwhelmed, I stepped in. I stopped thinking about what was technically part of my role and just focused on making sure nothing slipped through the cracks. Over time, people began to come to me first before going to management. I didn't mind. I liked solving problems. I liked being the person who could figure things out when others were stuck. It made the long hours feel worth it. Sometimes leadership would thank me quietly. A quick word in the hallway. A nod in a meeting. Nothing formal, but enough to make me believe they noticed. I told myself it would matter one day. That all of this effort would eventually lead somewhere. Around the 5th year, the company hit its lowest point. We lost a major client, and suddenly everything felt uncertain. There were rumors about budgets being cut and departments being combined. People started looking nervous again, just like they had during the first wave of departures. One night, I stayed late trying to fix a system issue that was affecting a project deadline. It wasn't even my responsibility, but no one else knew how to handle it. I worked for hours, slowly piecing things together until everything started running again. The next morning, one of the senior managers stopped by my desk. "Thanks for stepping in last night," he said quietly. "That helped more than you know." It wasn't a big moment. No announcement. No recognition in front of others. Just a simple comment before he walked away. But I held on to it. Moments like that made me believe I was doing the right thing by staying. That even if things were hard now, the company would remember who helped carry it through the worst years. And I was certain the worst would pass eventually. The years that followed blurred together in a steady rhythm of pressure and quiet persistence. People continued to leave, though not in waves like before. One at a time. Slowly enough that it never caused a panic, but fast enough that you could feel the weight shifting. Every time someone walked out for the last time, their work didn't disappear. It settled onto the shoulders of whoever was still there. More often than not, that meant me. I didn't keep track of how many roles I picked up along the way. I just learned what I needed to learn and kept going. I knew which systems would fail under pressure, which clients needed constant attention, and which problems could quietly grow if no one noticed them in time. I stopped thinking of my job as a title. I just thought of it as responsibility. There were nights I drove home so tired I barely remembered the trip. But there was always a small sense of pride underneath it. I was still there. Still holding things together. I believed that mattered more than anything else. Somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking about leaving. At first, I used to browse job postings every once in a while, just to see what was out there. But as time passed, that habit faded. I told myself I didn't need to look. I had stability. I had a place where people knew my name and relied on me. Even when friends asked why I stayed, I always had the same answer. I've put too much into this to walk away now. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It felt like I was part of the foundation that kept everything standing. If something broke, I was one of the first people called. If a deadline was at risk, I was someone they trusted to step in. That kind of trust felt rare. So I stayed. Year after year. I didn't notice how much time had passed until one day I realized I was one of the longest-standing people in the entire office. Most of the faces around me were new. But I was still there, exactly where I'd always been. Around my 8th year, something started to feel different. It wasn't obvious at first. There were no major announcements or sudden changes. But I began noticing new faces in leadership. New managers stepping into roles that had been empty for months. Meetings happening more often behind closed doors. The atmosphere shifted in a quiet way. There were more conversations about efficiency and realignment. Words that sounded harmless, but carried a kind of weight I couldn't quite explain. Projects were reviewed more closely. Budgets were discussed more carefully. Decisions took longer than they used to. I kept doing what I had always done. Showing up early. Handling issues before they turned into problems. Covering gaps wherever they appeared. It felt natural at this point. Like a routine I didn't even have to think about. But for the first time in years, I noticed something else. I wasn't being included in certain meetings anymore. At first, I assumed it was just because the topics didn't involve my work directly. But over time, the number of meetings I wasn't part of kept growing. And no one explained why. Then something unexpected happened. My workload started getting lighter. At first, I didn't question it. After years of carrying more than one role, a quieter week felt almost like a break. I caught up on tasks I had been putting off. Organized files. Updated documentation that had needed attention for months. But the quiet didn't pass. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself with more time than I'd had in years. Systems I used to maintain daily were suddenly handled by someone else. Clients I used to speak with regularly were assigned to new contacts. No one said anything to me directly. If I asked, I was told things were just being restructured. The word felt familiar. Still, I kept showing up and doing whatever was left for me to do. I told myself the company was stabilizing. Maybe this was what things looked like when everything finally started getting better. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting around me again. I tried to convince myself the change was a good thing. After years of constantly being stretched thin, maybe the company was finally in a position to rebuild properly. Maybe they were hiring new people to take over areas I had been covering alone. It would make sense. It would mean things were improving. But the quiet didn't feel like relief. It felt like distance. People still greeted me in the mornings, still stopped by my desk for quick questions now and then. But the deeper involvement I used to have was fading. Decisions were being made without me. Projects were being handled by teams I wasn't part of anymore. I kept telling myself not to take it personally. 10 years was a long time. Things change. Companies evolve. Roles shift. I tried to stay positive, focusing on the tasks still in front of me. Still, there were moments when I caught myself sitting at my desk, waiting for something to break, waiting for someone to call my name the way they used to. And when nothing happened, the silence felt heavier than the pressure ever did. That quiet gave me more time to think than I'd had in years. I started noticing things I used to ignore. How much of my life had been shaped around this job. How many late nights I had traded for weekends I could have spent doing something else. How many times I chose stability over opportunity without even realizing it. I remembered the people who left in those early years. The ones who warned me not to get too comfortable. At the time, I thought they were giving up too quickly. Now, I wasn't so sure. Still, I never regretted staying. I believed in what I had built there. I believed the effort meant something. That belief stayed with me until the morning everything changed. It started like any other day. I arrived early, set my bag down, and turned on my computer. The office felt normal. Quiet, but steady. Then, just a few minutes later, my manager walked over and said, "Laura, can you come with me for a moment?" And suddenly, the calm morning didn't feel calm anymore. I followed him down the hallway without asking any questions. Something in his tone made it clear this wasn't a casual conversation. We passed by desks and closed office doors until we reached a small meeting room near the end of the corridor. The moment I stepped inside, I saw HR already sitting at the table. My chest tightened. That was when I knew this wasn't about a project update or a schedule change. I sat down slowly, placing my hands in my lap to keep them steady. My manager took a seat beside HR, but he didn't look at me right away. The room felt too quiet, like the air had gone still. HR opened a folder in front of her and gave me a small, polite smile. "Laura," she began gently, "thank you for taking the time to meet with us." The formality in her voice made my stomach drop. I waited for her to continue, hoping I was wrong about what this was. But then she said the words I never expected to hear. "We've made the decision to eliminate your role." For a moment, I couldn't react. It didn't feel real. I blinked, trying to make sense of what she had just said. "Eliminate my role?" I repeated quietly. HR nodded once. "The company is moving in a new direction, and we've had to make some structural changes. This decision isn't about your performance. You've been a valuable part of the team." Valuable. The word echoed in my head. If I was valuable, why was I sitting here? I glanced at my manager, searching for something in his expression. Some explanation. Some sign that this was more complicated than it sounded. But he kept his hands folded on the table, eyes focused downward. "How long has this been planned?" I asked. There was a brief pause before HR answered. "These decisions take time," she said carefully. "We've been reviewing different areas for a while." A while. So this didn't start this morning. I felt a slow heaviness settle in my chest. 10 years. And somehow, the decision to let me go had already been made long before I walked into that room. I sat there for a moment, trying to process everything. 10 years passed through my mind in flashes. Late nights. Quiet victories no one noticed. Systems I kept running when they should have failed. People who leaned on me when there was no one else left. I thought about how many times I stayed when I could have left. And now I was being told it was over. Is there anything I could have done differently? I asked quietly. HR shook her head. "No, this isn't about anything you did wrong. It's strictly a business decision." A business decision. The words felt distant and final, like a door closing. My manager finally spoke, his voice low. "We appreciate everything you've done here, Laura. Truly." I nodded once, not trusting myself to say anything else. HR slid a paper toward me, explaining final pay and transition details. I listened, but the words felt far away. The conversation ended faster than I expected. And, just like that, it was done. I walked back to my desk slowly, trying to keep my breathing steady. The office looked exactly the same as it always had. People typing. Phones ringing. Conversations happening in low voices. Nothing around me seemed to notice that something in my world had just changed completely. I picked up my bag from where it rested beside my chair. I didn't have much else there. Over the years, I had stopped decorating my space, stopped bringing in personal things. I always thought I'd do it later, when things felt more settled. Later never came. A few people glanced in my direction, sensing something was different. I gave a small nod to one or two of them, not trusting myself to speak. Then I walked toward the exit. No box. No announcement. Just me and the sound of my footsteps down the hallway. 10 years ended in silence, with nothing but my bag over my shoulder. The drive home felt strangely quiet. I kept both hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead as if focusing on the road would keep everything else from settling in. 10 years. I kept repeating it in my head, like saying the number enough times might help it make sense. But it didn't. I thought about how many times I chose to stay when others left. How many evenings I spent fixing problems that weren't technically mine. How many times I told myself that loyalty meant something. Now I was driving home with nothing but my bag beside me. No warning. No chance to prepare. Just an ending that came in the middle of a normal morning. When I got home, I set my bag down by the door and stood there for a moment, unsure what to do next. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I had always come home tired, thinking about the next day's tasks. Now there was no next day waiting. The stillness felt unfamiliar. For the first time in years, I didn't know what tomorrow would look like. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the past decade in my mind. Moments I had forgotten came back clearly. The first time I stayed late to fix a system crash. The day a team member thanked me for helping them meet a deadline. The quiet nods from management when something went right. I had built my entire routine around that place. It shaped my mornings, my evenings, my weekends. I didn't realize how much space it had taken up until it was suddenly gone. A part of me wondered if I should have seen it coming. There had been signs. The lighter workload. The meetings I wasn't invited to. The slow distance that formed over time. I just never thought it would end like this. Not after everything. I turned onto my side, trying to settle my thoughts. 10 years felt like a long time to give something. And in one morning, it had all slipped quietly out of my hands. The next morning felt unfamiliar in a way I couldn't quite explain. For years, I woke up at the same time without needing an alarm. My body was trained to start the day early, to get ahead of whatever problems might be waiting. But now, there was no urgency. No system to check. No messages to answer. I still woke up early out of habit. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at nothing in particular. The quiet stretched around me in a way that felt both peaceful and uncomfortable at the same time. Part of me expected my phone to buzz. A question about a system. Someone needing help. A problem only I knew how to fix. But the phone stayed silent. It was a strange realization. For years, I had felt essential. Needed. Important to the way things ran. And now, just one day later, everything seemed to be moving forward without me. I didn't know if that was supposed to make me feel relieved or forgotten. Later that afternoon, I opened my laptop and started updating my resume. It felt strange trying to summarize 10 years into a few lines. There were so many small things I had done over time, so many problems I had solved quietly. Most of it was never written down. It just lived in my memory. I tried to put it into words. System recovery. Client support. Process management. Troubleshooting across departments. As I typed, I realized how much I had actually handled over the years. It wasn't just one job. It was pieces of many different roles blended together. Still, something held me back. I kept wondering if staying that long had been a mistake. If it made me look like someone who didn't grow, someone who got comfortable. I paused, staring at the screen. Then I added one more line. 10 years of continuous service during company restructuring and recovery. It didn't feel like much, but it was the truth. The rest of the day passed slowly. I sent out a few applications, not expecting much right away. It felt strange introducing myself again, trying to explain who I was without the comfort of the place I had spent the last 10 years. Every form asked the same questions. Experience, skills, previous roles. I kept wondering how to explain everything I had done. So much of it didn't fit neatly into one title. By evening, I closed the laptop and tried to clear my mind. Starting over felt heavier than I expected. Not because I didn't believe I could find something else, but because it felt like I was stepping into the unknown after being rooted in one place for so long. Just as I was about to set my phone down for the night, it buzzed. An unfamiliar number. For a moment, I thought about ignoring it. I wasn't ready for more difficult conversations. But something made me answer. Hello. A calm, professional voice responded. Hi, is this Laura Bennett? I straightened slightly, surprised. Yes, this is Laura, I replied. Hi, Laura. My name is Daniel. I'm calling from a technology firm in the area. I came across your profile and wanted to speak with you about a role that might match your experience. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. It had barely been a couple of days since I lost my job. I hadn't expected to hear from anyone so quickly. I tried to keep my voice steady. I'm listening, I said. He began asking questions about my background. What systems I worked with, how long I had been in my last role, the types of challenges I handled. The conversation felt natural, like something I used to do all the time. As I spoke, I found myself explaining things I hadn't even written on my resume yet. The late-night fixes. The times I stepped in to keep things running. The years spent holding everything together quietly. There was a pause on the line. Then he said, thoughtfully, "You've handled quite a lot over the years." I let out a small breath I didn't realize I was holding. It was just part of the job, I said. Things needed to get done. There was a quiet pause on the other end, the kind that felt more thoughtful than empty. Daniel continued asking about specific situations. Time systems went down. How I handled clients during difficult periods. What it was like working through restructuring. I answered honestly, not trying to impress, just explaining what those years had really been like. The conversation didn't feel like an interview. It felt more like someone trying to understand the full picture. At one point, he mentioned hearing about a company that had gone through years of instability, but somehow managed to keep things running. He spoke about it in a general way, without naming anyone. I felt a small sense of recognition. That sounds familiar, I said lightly. I spent 10 years at a place like that. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he asked, "Can I ask what your full name is, just to make sure I have it correct for my notes?" Laura Bennett, I said. The line went quiet. The silence stretched just long enough for me to notice. Daniel? I asked, wondering if the call had dropped. I'm here, he said quickly, but his tone had changed. There was a hint of surprise in his voice now. You said your name is Laura Bennett? Yes, I replied, a little unsure. That's right. There was another pause, this one longer. That's interesting, he said slowly. I've heard that name before. More than once, actually. My grip on the phone tightened slightly. Heard it where? I asked. He took a moment before answering, like he was piecing something together. In conversations over the years, he said. People mentioning someone who kept certain systems running when things were falling apart. Someone who stayed when teams were turning over. I felt my chest tighten. I never knew who they were talking about, he continued. It was always just someone in the background who handled everything. But the name stuck. I didn't know what to say. For the first time since the call started, it felt like something bigger was unfolding. I sat there in silence, trying to take in what he was saying. For years, I've heard stories from people in the industry, Daniel continued, about someone who stayed with a company through every rough period. Someone who quietly kept things from collapsing when entire teams walked away. No one ever gave details. Just a name that came up once in a while. My heart was beating faster now. They were talking about me? I asked softly. It sounds like it, he said. I didn't connect it at first. But the more you described what you handled, the more it started to match what I'd heard. I looked down at my hands, still trying to process it. For so long, I thought the work I did stayed inside those office walls. I thought the late nights and constant problem-solving were things only a few people ever noticed. But somehow, the story had traveled. People had talked. And I had never known. Daniel's voice softened slightly as he spoke again. You may not realize it, but your reputation reached further than you think. People remember the ones who keep things running when no one else can. They just don't always know who that person is. I let that settle in for a moment. 10 years of staying. 10 years of carrying responsibilities no one asked for. I had walked away thinking it all disappeared the moment I stepped out that door with my bag over my shoulder. But it hadn't. It had built something I couldn't see at the time. I'd really like to set up a formal interview, Daniel continued. We're looking for someone who can handle pressure, solve problems, and stay steady when things get difficult. From what I've heard, and from what you've told me, you might be exactly who we need. For the first time in days, I felt something shift. Losing that job still hurt. But maybe the years I spent staying weren't wasted after all. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.